We'll call the meeting back to order. So first up, we have Scott Randall and staff. Yeah, I'm not sure who's leading the discussion.
Madam Chairwoman.
Go ahead, Whisper.
I'm not sure who is either, but I see a lot of the MDT folks are on here, and I believe we'll be doing an update on the Nine Pipes feasibility study that's going to be happening that our staff are participating in. So hopefully they're all just getting it set up. I don't see Scott Randall, but I think that perhaps Jacqueline or Parker might be in charge.
Sure. Hi there. This is Parker Osterloh. I am in Montana Department of Transportation statewide and urban planning section. I'm managing the US 93 nine pipe feasibility study. Like Whisper said, I don't see, oh, it looks like Scott just got into the meeting. He has a presentation, but I just wanted to take a moment from MDT and thank you guys for your time.
You're welcome. There's Scott.
Hello, how's it going? I got a little hung up trying to get logged in here this morning, but I think I'm on now, so.
Well, welcome. If you have a presentation, you're welcome to screen share.
Sounds good. I think I got it up and running. So yeah, thanks everybody for having us this afternoon and for the introductions there. As Parker mentioned, we're here to present kind of a high level look at this nine pipe corridor feasibility study that we're tasked with completing. We're just getting this thing kind of kicked off and underway. And so we wanted to just have a quick presentation on what we plan to do with this study and kind of open it up for some feedback and any questions you might have. We don't have any answers quite yet today with anything, obviously, as we're just getting this started, but wanted to make sure that we had some, ongoing and continued dialogue throughout this process, and just wanted to give you kind of the overview of, like I said, what we plan to do over the coming months. So with that, just wanted to touch on a little bit of the background and some history. I know, you all are probably very familiar with so much of the US 93 corridor and a lot of the history and challenges there in the past. And this kind of stemmed going way back to 1996 with the original EIS that was completed for a large portion of Highway 93. Following that, there was a more detailed supplemental EIS that was completed in 2008. That was for just the Post Creek Hill and Ronan segments, so about an 11-mile segment. So, those parts of that supplemental EIS, parts of that corridor are under various stages of project development right now. This nine pipe corridor piece is kind of, that remaining piece that still has some challenges, and we're still trying to figure out exactly what we can do out there and what we can't do out there. And so I think, MDT and Federal Highways and others, kind of decided it was a good opportunity with some of the ongoing work out there to take a more detailed look at this corridor and trying to figure out what's changed since 2008 and what might impact project development or kind of what those considerations are so that, something could move forward with an actual design and project development process. So the piece that we're looking at is specifically from Gunlock Road, just south of the Nine Pipe Reservoir, which is at reference point 40 approximately. And then to the north, about 4.5 miles up to Brook Lane, just past Molman Pass Trail. So again, it's about a 4.5 mile corridor. It's right in between that Post Creek Hill segment and Ronan South segments. Kind of one of the things we're trying to focus on with this study is taking some of the complications, we would say, and lessons learned from other projects that have occurred recently and seeing how that would influence this corridor as well to make sure that we're learning and making improvements and understanding kind of those challenges. So going to that SEIS that was completed again in 2008, the recommendation for this corridor was to reconstruct this portion of the road into a 2-lane undivided segment. It would again connect to the Post Creek Hill segment to the south, which is a 2-lane undivided roadway with passing lane on the south side, and then also connect to the north end of the Ronan Urban Project, which is a 4-lane divided roadway. So this segment itself, 2-lane undivided roadway, also with a recommendation for separated pedestrian and bicycle path. A couple other things I would note, within the SEIS, there's a fair amount of detail and attention paid to wildlife crossings and water crossings. But when it comes to some of the other details, such as, how the shared use path would be put in there, some alignment things, it's a little lacking on some details. And so we're hoping to understand things a little better with this study and figure out what that might look like moving forward. So our objectives with this planning process are to, first verify baseline conditions. Again, I mentioned, this was looked at in 2008. A lot has changed in those, 12, 13 years since that SEIS occurred. So we want to verify those conditions that were documented back then and see what has changed since that time. We also want to confirm the viability of the preferred alternatives. So that viability of the 2-lane segment with the shared use path, what that looks like. Is that still viable? Are there changes in conditions or concerns about constructability or impacts or costs that have changed since 2008 that may influence that preferred alternative one way or another? And then use this process to support future development decisions, such as the reevaluation process and the design moving forward. So our approach to achieving these objectives is to rely on existing information that we can, going back to the 2008 document, but also any new available information that's out there. We'll also be supplementing with our own kind of data review process, and I'll touch on some highlights about with that here in a second. And then considering kind of these minor modifications to minimize impacts and costs. So if we see opportunities to make some tweaks or some fine tuning to what was looked at in the past to minimize those impacts or reduce costs, we'll identify those opportunities. And then this is kind of a challenging project. It's a bit of a hybrid approach. It's not fully planning. It's not fully environmental or engineering. It's kind of a blending of everything together. So we're kind of staying high level of a planning level for most of this, but then we're trying to bring in some engineering components such as survey and geotechnical and the environmental considerations too that are very important and could be impactful to project development too. So our work plan, as far as how we plan to achieve this study, is kind of broken down into multiple tasks. Just for the sake of organization, I'm just going to walk through a couple of these tasks and some highlights, just to let you know again how we plan to operate and develop this study over the coming months. The task 2 speaks about public and agency involvement. This is obviously very, very critical. This is a very sensitive corridor and challenging corridor. We know there's a lot of interest in history here, and so we want to make sure to be out there in the forefront, hearing from everybody as best we can about their concerns and their thoughts and their experiences, and not be doing this in a vacuum. And so we have developed what's called a public and agency involvement plan, which kind of outlines that process and kind of documents how we plan to engage with the community and stakeholders and everybody else throughout this process. We have what's called an advisory committee that's kind of overseeing the development of the study. It's made, the composition is MDT officials, federal highways, ourselves as the consultant. We have CSKT representatives too. So we have a very good, broad group of individual with key experiences and technical expertise, which is great. We are planning to meet approximately every 8 weeks throughout the next about 12 to 15 months. As a group, we have a meeting coming up in a couple of weeks, actually. And so the point of these meetings is to review deliverables and provide overall guidance on this study process. We do have a project website. It is hosted on MDT's webpage. And so if you're familiar with MDT's webpage, they have a public involvement page, and you can find the link to this study on that page. And I'll show you a link here at the end of this presentation too. And then we will be doing kind of progress updates. We plan to do email blasts. I'm sure some of you received our first email blast a few weeks ago, where we just kind of introduced the process and we had a flyer that we sent out. We'll be doing those intermittently as we have updates available. As far as meetings go, we do have 2 public meetings that we plan on holding. I'll show you a schedule here towards the end on when we expect those to occur, but they're going to be focused on getting feedback on kind of our existing conditions and then kind of our recommendations moving forward. We do have a lot of what we call resource agency meetings. We had one just last week, was our first one as an introductory meeting with a bunch of resource agencies to kind of give the same presentation essentially about what we plan to do and hear about their initial concerns. And then, of course, the Tribal Council, why we're here today, and we have had a meeting with the CSKT Highway team as well recently, and then Technical Design Committee are other meetings that we're going to be having. So, long story short, it's a lot of meetings, a lot of interaction and involvement we plan on having throughout the coming months. And then also we'll be coordinating with other stakeholders and the TIPO as we move forward as well. Task 3 speaks to our analysis of relevant conditions. So this is kind of our background investigation and kind of understanding what's out there today and what those conditions are. So I mentioned we'll be looking at available data and information. We have a lot of good information that's available from 2008 and new information that's available to us. So we'll be looking at that and then supplementing that again with field review and investigation for more detailed areas. We've done some traffic and safety investigations over the last about month. We've also done some geotechnical investigations. We know that the soils and the water are very challenging conditions in this area and other areas that are nearby. And so understanding what those soil conditions are and what those challenges are is extremely important and influential when we talk about improvements in what the corridor might look like moving forward. We've been doing right-of-way research, so we fully understand what the available right-of-way is and what some of the constraints are there. We will be out there doing survey as well, so getting an understanding of survey conditions too. And then we are doing wetland and wildlife investigation and cultural and historic investigation. We have some sub-consultants on board that are helping with those areas too. So what this will all result in is a documentation of relevant conditions memo. That's kind of, I have a schedule here again at the end that'll show that, but we're targeting sometime in the midwinter to have this relevant conditions memo that'll be out there that will be circulating for review. So when we talk about kind of the areas that we're looking at, the SEIS went in a lot of detail on a lot of different resource areas and areas of concern and trying to understand, from an environmental standpoint, all these different affected resources. For this process, we're not fully redoing that EIS. We're really trying to look at things that are most influential to project development or could be most impacted. And so these areas that are highlighted are the areas that we're going to be focusing on. So not that the other areas aren't important, but these highlighted areas are kind of our key focus because they're project drivers, I would say, that could really influence things. So things like, how land use has changed maybe since 2008, peds and bikes when we talk about the shared use path, wetlands. So we've done a full wetland investigation to understand what has changed again since 2008, since this was last looked at, floodplains and streams, cultural, and then geological and soils are critically important too. So once we kind of get an understanding of the relevant conditions, that'll move us into what we call the feasibility evaluation. So we know what we got on the ground, we know what the challenges are. Now we need to determine what's feasible and what the challenges might be for the project development. So, we can look at setting a preliminary alignment profile for the road and path and understanding what that might look like and what those impacts might be. We need to evaluate the recommendations for structures and wildlife crossings from the SEIS and see if those are still appropriate today, given what we know now and what might have changed since 2008. We also need to understand kind of the preliminary construction and right-of-way limits for the preferred alignment, and then understand again impacts and costs and bring those up to date with current conditions. And what we'll do is we'll take all that and understand, what's feasible, what's not feasible, what kind of tweaks we can make to either lower impacts or lower costs or make things work a little bit better. Then ultimately we'll be kind of evaluating that against, what's out there today, the no action condition, and then kind of making a determination of feasibility moving forward. So lastly, on our work plan, all this information will be just documented in a report, the feasibility study report. And so this process will summarize the planning process and the key findings, any of those changed conditions again since 2008, the screening process to evaluate the preferred alternative, and then talk about next steps into project development. And so what we will do for this process is we'll develop what's called an administrative draft. That's our first internal draft, which we'll circulate with the advisory committee for review. And then once we're good at that, we'll send it out to a public review process. And we'll have at least a 30-day window for public review. And then we'll take comments and feedback and eventually finalize that report up. So as far as schedule goes, we just kicked this study off this summer and started kind of some of the preliminary investigation kind of late this summer, where we just went out and are doing our field work right now. We got our geotech investigations done a couple of weeks ago. We did a field review actually yesterday out on the corridor. We have survey ongoing right now. So we're doing really this analysis of relevant conditions and the field work right now. We had our first round, I mentioned, of resource agency coordination just last week. So that'll kind of get us through into the winter. In the winter time period, we'll start developing that report, the documentation of relevant conditions that we hope to have completed by the end of the winter. And before we do finalize that, we will host our first public meeting and do some more agency coordination as well, kind of in the January, February timeframe is what we're shooting for. And then once we get through that, then we'll host another round of public meetings in the late spring to early summertime period, where we'll talk about the recommendations that come out and the feasibility of the alternative. And then we hope to go through the kind of review and adoption process or approval process basically about a year from now, and hope to have everything completed by the end of November of next year. So that's kind of my quick 15-minute presentation. I do, I'll open it up for any questions or comments you might have. Here's the websites on MDT's webpage that has some more information. Again, I don't have a ton to share on existing conditions or any real findings right now. That's what we're doing today. I think next time we meet in the coming months, we'll be able to have a little more actual detailed information to share with you, hopefully. So I guess with that, I don't know, Parker, if you had anything else you wanted to add, or anybody else from MDT that's on that might want to add anything.
No, great job, Scott. Thank you very much. I would just go ahead and add, feel free to reach out and contact me with any questions or concerns you have about this corridor study as we're moving through the process.
Thank you, Scott. Just echo what Parker said. Thank you. Great presentation, Parker. Thanks for chiming in. I did want to also just boil it down for tribal council, unless I'm sure the question is, well, why are you doing this? And what it really comes down to is we are short on funding for all of our road systems, and so we're encouraging communities to look for grants to apply for projects. And Dan had started working on trying to get a very large grant to fund this and the remaining 93 segment work. And so by us moving forward with this study, this better positions CSKT in successfully obtaining a grant to finish the 93 corridor. This study will help mitigate a lot of risk that some agencies or the grant agencies might see as showstoppers for projects, but we're really hoping that this is just going to help better position us to relieve some of those fears. So thank you for your time, for letting us do this and have the presentation with you today.
Okay, Anita and then Len.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. My question was, when you're looking at the safety data, this is probably the worst stretch of that highway. I drove it for over 17 years, and I know that the past chairman even made remarks about how dangerous this stretch of the road is. So I'm really interested in finding out what this project might do for the safety of that stretch of the road. I don't know if you've looked at wrecks that have happened out there and some of the other concerns. But people, I don't even know if it would help slowing traffic down because these individuals are passing you at that stretch of the road when other cars are coming. And I don't know how many wrecks have happened or so darn close to having a wreck that you're off in the ditch. So will those be some of the things that you're looking at before you start construction?
Yes, very, very good comments, and you're absolutely right. We do have safety data, we have crash data, and we also have animal carcass data too. And so there are two pieces of data that we'll be looking at and evaluating and seeing if we can identify trends, hotspot areas where we're having incidents, and things of that nature. We do have the data. We've done a kind of a preliminary look at it. I don't have anything to share today as far as results, but that is part of our first, this first piece, the analysis of relevant conditions. We will be focusing very heavily on safety for sure. We were out there yesterday walking the corridor, and I mean, you're absolutely right. We saw people passing where they shouldn't be passing, just the amount of traffic and everything. I think we can all appreciate the challenges with that and the safety implications with that too. So that's a very major focus of this, absolutely.
Go ahead. The other follow-up I would have is the amount of traffic that we have during the summer months with all the tourism. And it's just horrid. There's one car piled up after another. And so, thank you.
Okay, Len has something.
Thank you, Shelley, and members of the council and MDT. I want to thank you guys all for visiting with council today and giving us this update. One of the questions that I always ask, that I've been contemplating on is with the government's new proposed infrastructure plan that is in the process of being passed or not. Is there going to be enough funding in there in that plan to complete the Highway 93 corridor across the reservation? Does anybody?
This is Jacqueline. I can speak to that. We're tracking it closely. We don't know what the exact dollar amount that MDT will receive or even narrow it down more for the national highway system, which 93 is on, how much funding we will get for those projects. So I can't give a solid answer on that other than I can give my suspect answer in that I think I'm doubtful that we will receive enough funding to complete the 93 corridors with the infrastructure bill. It seems like what we're projecting right now is that we expect to see about a 15% increase from what we currently receive. So that'd be another about 8 million. So that's enough to fund like a mill fill or a rehab type project somewhere. But like I mentioned earlier, we know there's a need out here and there is strong community support for it. And so we're really trying to position ourselves to successfully get a grant to help fund this work sooner rather than later. Does that answer your question?
Well, it wasn't the answer I was looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. I just get, I appreciate these conversations because I always need to remind MDOT and the state of Montana, not to forget about us here, especially when it comes to the Highway 93 project, because this project has been worked on for, 20 plus years. And we're just barely getting to the end here and it gets stopped. And other Montana highways get put on the priority list. And I'm just going to continue to advocate strongly that let's get this Highway 93 done and completed. We just barely completed one segment and identified numerous safety concerns that we still would like to get addressed. And before we even start working on those, we're jumping on another project here. So anyway, I just want to throw that out there. And I know everybody's hands are tied on when it comes to funding, but I just believe as one of the tribal leaders here, we just need to try to advocate to get this main highway done, because we've been watching just too many tragic accidents happen on this highway because of the flaws. And but like I said, I appreciate these. I appreciate these discussions with you all, and we'll just continue to have this dialogue until we can get it all completed. But thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. And I am pretty hopeful and optimistic that this can really help us secure some type of funding through that grant. And I need to follow up more with, I guess I'm not entirely sure if it would be those acting in Dan's place right now, or when his official replacement is there, to find out more about CSKT pursuing that grant, and how MDT can help with that application.
Scott Johnson, can you speak to that particular subject?
Sorry, you cut out. I couldn't hear who you called on.
Scott Johnson?
Yes, hi. Yeah, we will be looking for grants and anything that we can apply for to go to this. I'll be working with Jocelyn and the MDT to help me look too.
And this is Parker again. I'll just go ahead and jump in and add on to what Jacqueline and Scott was saying. This study will allow us to have a much better understanding of what we're going to experience when it comes time to nominate and develop a project. So even though right now we're just in the study phase of it, we should be able to, when the grant opportunity comes up and it comes time to apply for grants or move further into the project development life cycle, be able to act a little quicker based on what we learned from this study.
Yeah, that's a great point, Parker. What we did see with a lot of these grants require like a 3-year time frame. There's a hard deadline, and it's a relatively short deadline usually for delivering the project. And especially these 93 corridor ones, they are complex and they take several years to develop, as we're seeing with Post Creek and Ronan. And I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys know it's taking a long time. So by us reviewing everything now, we should be able to, just as Parker said, deliver something sooner and meet the timeline requirements for whatever grant we can get.
Well, I appreciate your consultation with CSKT as a sovereign. I just wanted to mention that we have seen this tremendous influx of COVID refugees here on the reservation, and some of them may be used to 4, 6, 8 lane highways where they come from. And so I really hope that our input as a stakeholder, and again, I want to stress as a sovereign that we be given, I guess, our input be taken seriously that way. One thing I have not heard mentioned was the wildlife, and I saw several turtles this week crossing in that particular stretch of highway, and that's something that happens every year. So I don't think that's changed from 2008, but I'm just curious how we accommodate for those crossings. I know they would be different from, the other wildlife ones that go under the highway. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, this is Scott Randall again. I can speak to that. So we're basically our starting baseline conditions are what were identified in the SEIS from 2008. And so when we look at that SEIS, there were a number of crossing locations. There were multiple bridge crossings, and then also large culvert crossings too. And so some were to facilitate wildlife movements for land mammals, and some were for water movements too. So there's kind of a combination depending on where the wildlife needs were identified during that process. So with this corridor study process, we are updating that information to be more relevant to current conditions, again, since it's been 13 years. So we do have a sub-consultant on board that'll be doing a wildlife investigation to figure out what the wildlife usage is and making sure we understand what those needs are. And then we'll be evaluating those crossing needs and those structures to make sure they're appropriately designed and sized for those needs that are identified. So that's a very large component for sure, is the wildlife piece. And we did see a turtle yesterday when we were out there too, just of note, and a lot of other animals too. So definitely appreciate that side.
Yeah, and I know that in the past, we've also had some grizzly bear fatalities as well. So I think there's a huge diversity of wildlife and, just other critters out there. So I guess I got my question on infrastructure answered, and then also the Eagle Pass Trail, especially, is a really dangerous crossing there. So, I know people are really anxious by the time they come from St. Ignatius going north and there's no passing lanes. And so maybe a lower speed limit is the answer versus a 4-lane, because again, there's the beautiful Mission Mountains there, and people just need to slow down and enjoy the scenery and not worry about getting to, their northernmost destination in, 5 minutes before someone else. So I just want our input to be, I guess, respected versus some of the newcomer stakeholders that might be involved in these public meetings. So thank you. Len has something?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just one comment here as we conclude. I noted that we have a lot of new players here involved ever since the Highway 93 project was started. And I just kind of want to remind everybody that it was Federal Highways and MDOT that have imposed this project on the tribes. And since it has begun, it just appears to me that every year to try to get this completed, we're put on the back burner. And and as I mentioned this numerous times, a good example is when the project was going at full speed or full steam, and we were completing these segments right along. All of a sudden, it comes to a complete halt, and they start constructing this $80 million project, which known as the 93 bypass in Kalispell. And that was really, really concerning to me, that things could change just like that, and priorities relooked at. So I think as a tribal council, we just need to continue to advocate to those powers involved that we just want this project completed. Because as I mentioned before, it was imposed on us. And anyway, I just wanted to just mention it and thank you all.
Any other comments from council? Joe, did you have something? Okay. Okay, it doesn't look like there's any other comments. So thank you for your presentation today, and we look forward to visiting your website and attending your meetings. So thank you so much.
Yes, and thank you very much for having us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Carol, did you have something for open session?
Yeah, I did, Madam Chair, and I was kind of worried about it. Oh, I'm bringing it up, but we have 3 graduates and 3 individuals graduating from drug court today. Carrie Juan Corn, Cody Best, and Caitlin. I won't say her last name, but yeah, I want to make sure I'm in attendance today at the drug court. So be it. It's the court actually starts at 4, but I want to be there at 3 for the.
Okay, we're going to adjourn here shortly and go over legislative policies.
Okay.
But there was a couple things I wanted to bring up. One was so we were contacted by forestry to see if people wanted to attend the Boulder field trip. There was a Google or a name. Yeah, so I think if council's interested in that, we may have to do a council day, because that Wednesday, we're actually scheduled for the Bad Rock Canyon field trip with preservation. So if people can respond to that. We also talked about a potential field trip on the Lower J Canal. If you could coordinate that for us, Jen, based on our team's calendar. And if people, if you don't know how to put your stuff in Teams, let Jen know so she can do that for us, so we don't have, you know, conflicts. There's a lot happening in October. And then the last thing I had was if you guys recall, when we did one of our planning sessions up at S&K Technologies in Polson, we watched a webinar from the Ho-Chunk Nation on Ho-Chunk Inc. and the retail and housing project that they had. And they actually invited us to their reservation to see what they do there. So this morning I got an invitation from Tada Atone. She was one of the other presenters on that same webinar, and they are open for a visit the week of October 25th through the 29th. So if anyone from council, I reached out to economic development and the housing task force or the homelessness task force to see if there's any interest in pursuing that. So if people could get back to me, I can respond to Tata. So I think that was it for today. We'll adjourn and then we'll visit with some of the staff on our legislative priorities. So. Motion by Anita to adjourn.